I left before they cut the cake. 500 guests, white tablecloths, a string quartet packing up early because nobody told them the night was over. My father was standing 11 feet away from me in a rented suit he'd pressed himself that morning, and 3 words came through a live microphone in front of everyone who mattered to our family. Something in me went very still. Not angry, not yet. What I did after that cost me the future I thought I was building. What came after that gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. Before I go further, if you're new here, hit subscribe, drop your city and the time where you're watching from. I read every comment. Now let me take you back to the second Saturday in September, the morning I almost made the worst mistake of my life. I grew up on a quiet street in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. In a bungalow my father built additions onto himself, one room at a time over 20 years. Nothing about the house turned heads. Aluminum siding, a maple leaf flag that faded a little more every summer, a driveway my father shoveled by hand even after he could have paid a kid from down the block to do it. The kitchen smelled like instant coffee from 5 in the morning until noon, because Desmond Roy was a man who started his day before the rest of the world bothered waking up. My father wasn't a talker. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation most of the year, and drove a 2008 Ford Ranger with a dent in the tailgate he never got around to fixing. Every morning he read the actual newspaper at the kitchen table. The Sault Star delivered, folded twice, not a phone, paper. He had a routine, and he kept it the way some men keep a promise. Quietly, steadily, without needing anyone to notice. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. The bills got paid. I went to decent schools. When I needed something, it showed up. When I asked for something unreasonable, my father looked at me over the newspaper and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. There's one memory I've turned over a lot since everything happened. I was maybe 16. Someone had invited my father to some industry dinner downtown, a hotel function, the kind of room where men in suits go to feel important. He looked at the invitation, set it on the counter, and said, "Don't do those anymore, son." That was it. No explanation. I didn't ask. He kept a small metal lockbox in the hall closet, and I noticed it 100 times growing up. Never saw it open. I used to think that was just who he was. I was wrong. I met Vanessa Hargrove at a continuing ed course in Toronto, 3 falls back. She was sharp, asked questions nobody else thought to ask, laughed at the right moments, had a way of taking something complicated and finding the simple thing underneath it. I liked her right away. Liked her for months before I said anything. We dated 8 months before I brought her up to the Sol. Everything went fine. My mother made her feel welcome. My father shook her hand, asked her 2 questions about her work, then went back to his paper. Vanessa told me afterward she found him quiet. I told her that was just him. Then she brought me home. Her family lived in Oakville, west of Toronto, in a neighborhood where every garage held 3 cars, and a landscaping crew came through every Thursday. Roland Hargrove worked in commercial real estate development. Marlene ran the household, and from what I could tell, most of Roland's social calendar too. The first time Marlene met my father was over a dinner I'd rather forget. He came in the Ranger. Vanessa's eyes landed on the truck for half a second. Not a long look, something she'd never admit to. Then she smiled at me. I filed that away and kept walking. 16 months in, I proposed. We set the wedding for the following spring. Somewhere in that stretch, I turned down a senior project manager role in Calgary. Better pay, bigger scope, the kind of opportunity I'd been working toward for years. I stayed because Vanessa was in Toronto, and I didn't want to ask her to choose. She never asked me to stay. She also never told me to go. I told myself it was a choice. I hadn't figured out yet that it was a test. The Hargrove house was the kind of place that made you look twice. High ceilings, framed photographs arranged on the wall, in a way that looked casual but clearly wasn't. A kitchen island big enough to land a small plane on. Marlene had set the table with real candles for what was supposed to be a casual Tuesday dinner. I noticed right away. Casual dinners don't need candles. Marlene started asking questions before the bread came out. What company did I work for? How long had I been there? What did the growth track look like? She wasn't hostile about it. Her voice stayed warm, her smile stayed in place. But the questions had a shape, like a form you fill out to see if you qualify for something. Roland mostly talked about wine. He had opinions about what we were drinking. He walked me through the label. He didn't ask me a single thing about myself. About 20 minutes in, Marlene steered the conversation toward family. She asked about my parents. I said my mother worked part-time at a dental clinic. Then she asked about my father. I said he was retired. Retired from what? She asked. He had a business, I told her. A short pause. She picked up her wine glass. I see, she said. 2 words, perfectly polite. And everyone at that table understood exactly what she meant. Cole, Vanessa's older brother, 36, broad-shouldered, a handshake like he was closing a deal, caught my eye and gave me a small smile. The kind people give when they want you to know they're in on something you're not. Vanessa changed the subject. Mentioned a restaurant she'd been to recently. The conversation moved on. I let it move on. That was my first mistake. It didn't end after that dinner. Over the following 6 months, Marlene developed a real talent for small public cuts. At a friend's birthday party, she introduced my parents to someone she knew. And these are Desmond and Patricia, Vanessa's, fiancé's parents. Very simple, honest people. She said it like a compliment. It wasn't. Roland was worse, in a different way. He didn't bother with packaging. At a backyard barbecue at their place, a knot of men stood around the grill talking shop, and I heard him say, loud enough to carry, Vanessa's always been independent. Picked herself a solid, hard-working type. Not exactly what we pictured, and he just let the sentence hang there. The men around him nodded. I didn't say anything that afternoon, but that night I sat down with Vanessa and told her plainly, if your family keeps talking about my father like that, I need to know you'll say something. Not for me. For him. She looked at me across the kitchen table, careful in her expression. Not defensive, not dismissive. The look you give when you already know the answer but you're not ready to say it. I'll handle it, she said. I want to be clear about something. I didn't stay because I'm a pushover. I stayed because I'd watched my father go 30-some years without asking anybody for anything. And the least I could do was try to build something real with the woman I loved before deciding it couldn't work. I gave her a fair shot, but I'd drawn a line. I hadn't said it out loud yet. I should have. The bridal shower was held at the Hargrove house, about 30 people, a Saturday afternoon. Catered food, flowers everywhere, the whole production. My parents came because that's what family does. My father wore a sport coat and dress pants, shoes polished. He stood near my mother, close to the edge of the room, watching everything with the same expression he wore, watching the evening news, patient. Taking it all in, unbothered. Marlene found him in the first 10 minutes. Desmond, she said, loud enough for the cluster of women nearby to hear. Do you need someone to drive you home later? We could arrange something. She said it with a wide smile, the kind that comes pre-loaded with its own explanation. She was being thoughtful, she was being generous, wasn't she? My father looked at her for a moment. I'm fine, Marlene, he said. Appreciate the concern. That was it. No edge in his voice, no change in his face. He didn't explain he'd driven himself. Didn't mention the truck. He just answered and let the silence after his answer do whatever it was going to do. Marlene blinked once and turned away. I could see, even from across the room, that his calm had irritated her more than an argument would have. Later that afternoon, I noticed a man I didn't recognize. Early 50s, well-dressed, one of Roland's business contacts, watching my father from across the room. Not a hostile look, more like someone trying to place a face he'd seen before. He pulled out his phone, seemed to think better of it, and put it away. On the drive home, I asked my father if he'd noticed what Marlene did. They don't know me, son, he said. That's their problem, not mine. I didn't fully understand what he meant, not yet. A week before the wedding, I went to pick Vanessa up from her parents' place. I let myself in the side door. She'd given me a key months back, and heard voices from the kitchen. The door was half open. I wasn't trying to listen, but voices carry, Marlene's. You could still call this off. Trevor Ashworth is a better match. You know that. A pause, Vanessa. Mom, the wedding's in a week. Marlene, exactly. There's still time. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds. Then I went back out the side door and sat in my car. Here's what I knew about the Ashworths. Old Oakville money, commercial real estate. Exactly the kind of family Marlene had been angling toward for years. I'd heard the name once or twice, in passing. A son named Trevor who'd gone to Queens, and now ran part of his father's firm. Never thought much about it. I sat in that car for 20 minutes. Ran through everything. What I'd heard, what it meant, what I was going to do about it. And then I made the worst decision of the whole year. I went back in, knocked, and pretended I'd just arrived. I want to be honest about why I did that. I wasn't scared of a fight. I stayed because I needed to know if Vanessa was in on it, or if she was just trying to manage her mother. I figured I'd find out at the wedding. Figured I'd see, in the moment that mattered, which way she'd lean. I gave her one more week's benefit of the doubt. I should have known then. Some answers don't need proof. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant in Yorkville, white walls, low lighting, the kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices because the people eating there don't ask. Marlene had picked it. She mentioned twice in the first 20 minutes, and once more after the appetizers, that she and Roland would be covering the bill. My parents arrived on time. My dad wore his best suit, navy double-breasted, the one he kept in a dry cleaning bag at the back of the closet. He looked good. Better than good, actually. He looked like a man who didn't need to dress up for anyone, but had bothered to anyway. Roland greeted them near the door, looked at my dad, nodded once, shook Patricia's, sorry, my mother's, hand, not my father's, just a nod. My mom noticed. I watched her eyes flick to my father's face, checking. His expression didn't change. Halfway through dinner, Marlene stood to say a few words. Thanked the venue, thanked the guests, said nice things about Vanessa. Then she turned slightly toward the end of the table where my parents sat and said, with a warm smile, doing a lot of work, and we're so glad Desmond's family could make it. Desmond, it's wonderful you could come. Like he'd traveled from somewhere difficult, like his presence required acknowledgement the way a generous donation would. Under the table, my mother found my hand, held it a second. I didn't look at her. My father picked up his fork and kept eating. Before I keep going, if you've ever sat at a table and felt someone you love get talked about instead of talked to, I want to know. Leave it in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This story's got a long way to go, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Marlene pulled me aside near the coat check at the end of the night. She had a look of practiced concern on her face. I just want to make sure tomorrow goes well for everyone, she said. Your father might feel a little out of his depth with the kind of guests we'll have. Maybe coach him if you can. I looked at her for a moment. My father has never embarrassed anyone in his life, I said. She smiled. Of course. I didn't sleep that night. Lay on top of the hotel sheets, staring at the ceiling, trying to work out if I was doing the right thing. Not the wedding specifically, everything. The way I'd let things drag on this long. The way I kept drawing lines in my head and pushing them back every time someone got close to them. At 1 a.m, I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. Still up, he said, not surprised. Just checking. Yeah, I said. We didn't talk about anything important for a few minutes. He asked if the hotel room was comfortable. I said it was fine. Then I asked him about what I'd been carrying all day. You good with all this? A pause. I could hear the TV on low in his room down the hall. Some nature program. Something about water. I'm fine, son, he said. They're not kind to you. No, he said. They're not. Doesn't that bother you? Not really a question. He answered it anyway. People show you who they are, he said. I've seen enough of that not to let it bother me. I didn't have anything to say to that. Before he hung up, he said something I've turned over a lot since. Whatever happens tomorrow, you don't owe anybody your dignity, remember that. I said goodnight. Lay there another hour in the dark, replaying his words. He'd said whatever happens, not what people say, whatever happens. Like he'd already planned something. I told myself he was just a father being a father. I was wrong about that too. My father and I shared a room, a suite the hotel had set aside for the groom's family. He was already up when I came out of the bedroom, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, knotting his tie. Rented suit, white shirt, the same polished shoes from the shower. He looked completely at ease, hands steady. Same expression he always had, open, unhurried, like he was waiting for something he already knew was coming. You good, Dad? I asked. Always, he said. He watched me in the mirror while I fixed my own tie. You love her? He asked. Yeah, then do what you need to do today, not what anyone else needs you to do. I didn't know what to make of that. Just nodded. My phone buzzed. Cole Hargrove. Heads up. Mom wants your dad seated in the back. Less visible. Her words. Thought you should know. I read it twice. Cole had sent it the way some people do. Not to help you, but to watch what you do with it. To be part of what happened next, without any of the responsibility. I put the phone back in my jacket pocket and didn't answer. My father was at the window, looking down at the parking lot. He reached into the inner pocket of his vest and pulled something out. A plain white envelope, legal-sized, slightly worn at the corner. He looked at it for a moment, not long, then folded it once and put it back. Ready? He asked. Yeah, I said. We went downstairs. I never asked about the envelope. I wish I had asked sooner. The Royal Park Ballroom in Niagara-on-the-Lake held 500 people, and that day it held exactly that. White chairs in long rows, floral arrangements taller than me, a string quartet near the entrance. The kind of room that makes everything feel formal before anything's even happened. I found out where they'd seated my parents when I walked in with the wedding party. 8th row, left side, partly behind a marble column. From that angle you could see the altar, but no one looking from the altar could easily see you. The Hargroves sat front row. I stood at the altar and looked at that column, and something in me switched off. Not rage. Something quieter. That feeling you get when you've been telling yourself a story about a person, and you suddenly realize the story was never true. The ceremony started, the quartet played, Vanessa came down the aisle on Roland's arm looking beautiful, and I kept my face exactly where it needed to be. During the ring exchange, Roland leaned over to Marlene and said something. Quiet, but not quiet enough. 2 women in the second row glanced at each other. I caught one word, laborer. Marlene smiled, and that's when I saw him again. The man from the shower. I'd later learn his name was Gordon Pell, though I didn't have a name for him yet. He was seated near the stage with a group of Roland's business associates, watching my father, really watching, the way you look at someone you're trying to place. He pulled out his phone, held it for a second like he was deciding something, then put it away again. He'd already made his decision. He just didn't know what it was yet. The reception started the way these things do. The room filled with noise, glasses lifted. The band shifted from ceremonial music into something with a little more groove. 500 people talking at once creates a kind of pressure in a room. Presses against your chest. My parents found their table. I watched my father pull out my mother's chair. She sat. He smoothed his jacket and sat beside her. 2 people at a table of strangers, perfectly composed. Marlene went first, stood near the microphone by the head table and spoke for about 6 minutes. Talked about the Hargrove family, their history in Oakville, their values, what Vanessa meant to them. She was good at this. Her voice carried weight. People listened. She didn't mention my parents once. Desmond and Patricia Roy, the groom's parents, didn't exist within Marlene's 6 minutes. Roland followed something shorter, said I was a hard worker, said the family was thrilled to welcome me in, said hard worker the way some men do, not as a compliment but as a category, the kind of label you put on something useful that doesn't require much further thought. There was polite applause. I stood up to take the mic and say something simple, thank people, move things along. Marlene didn't step back. Oh, we're not quite finished, she said, not releasing the microphone. Her smile hadn't changed. She was looking at someone near the back of the room. I followed her gaze. She was looking at my father's table. I'd seen that smile before, in the kitchen doorway, at the rehearsal dinner. She wore it when she'd already decided something, and it was arriving right on schedule. I went very still. The band stopped playing. Maybe someone signaled them, or maybe they just felt the room shift. Either way, the music cut out, and the silence after it had weight. Marlene turned slightly toward my father's table. She held the microphone, the way someone holds something they've had in their hands for years. I want to say something about the Roy family, she began. Her voice was warm, thoughtful, the voice of someone giving a toast at a charity gala. Cale comes from humble beginnings, and I'm sure his father, Desmond, did the best he could for him. A pause, let it land. Then she turned to the woman next to her, one of her country club friends she'd met maybe twice, and whose name I never quite caught, and said, still into the mic, voice unchanged, "That's not really a father. That's just trailer trash who showed up." Some people laughed, short sounds, reflexive. A large part of the room went quiet. The particular silence of 500 people deciding what to do with something they'd just heard. I turned toward Vanessa. She was staring at the table. Then, as if she felt me looking, she looked up. Our eyes met for half a second, and at the corner of her mouth, something small and involuntary, just a flicker, a smile. She looked away from me immediately. I looked at my father. He hadn't moved, hands flat on the table. His face had, I don't have words for it that aren't too small. He looked like a man who'd decided, long before that moment, that other people's cruelty wasn't something that required a response. My mother had a cloth napkin pressed to her mouth. I pushed my chair back and stood up. 500 people watched me cross the room. Nobody said anything. The room had that charged stillness, where everyone can feel something's happening, but nobody knows which way it's going to break yet. I walked over to where Marlene stood. She was still holding the mic. I reached out and she handed it to me, not because she wanted to, but because the momentum of the moment made it the only logical thing to do. I turned and faced the room. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," I said. "I mean that." A pause. Long enough to have a shape of its own. "But I'm not going to stand here and listen to you talk about my father like that. Not in front of 500 people, not anywhere." I turned to Vanessa. She was gripping the edge of the table. I asked you once what you'd do if your family ever crossed that line. You said you'd handle it. Kale, don't. You smiled, Vanessa. She didn't answer. This wedding's over. I set the microphone down on the table beside me. Didn't drop it, didn't throw it, set it down. The way you put something away when you're done using it. Then I did the hardest thing in that room. I didn't say anything else. No explanation, no argument, no attempt to make Marlene understand. Because Marlene was never going to understand, and I was done spending my time on that. Someone near the back said something low. A chair scraped. One of the bridesmaids made a small, sharp sound. I wasn't angry, I was clear. Those are different things. Took me years to understand that difference, and it turned out to matter more than anything else that happened in that room. Roland stood up from his seat. You can't do this. He pointed at me, index finger out, the gesture of a man who spent his life telling people what to do. Do you have any idea what this is? Sit down. I'm done, I said, calm, even. He didn't sit. Marlene stepped forward, still holding it together, barely. Kale, you're making a scene. Sit down, let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. I turned. My father was standing. He'd gotten up without any fuss. No dramatic chair push, no announcement. Just standing, jacket straight, face calm. My mother had a hand on his arm. I looked at him across the room. He looked back at me. Let's go, Dad. He held my eyes a moment. Then he nodded, once. The kind of nod that means something's decided and doesn't need more discussion. He came around the table, past Marlene without looking at her. Not out of contempt. There was just nothing there that required his attention anymore. We headed for the exit. My mother followed, holding her small purse, the napkin still in her other hand. 500 people watched us walk out. The room started finding its rhythm again behind us. Chairs turning, voices low and urgent, people leaning toward each other. In the middle of all that, Marlene stood near the head table with a microphone she didn't have anymore and a room she no longer controlled. I didn't look back at her. Near the stage, at the table with Roland's business associates, Gordon Pell stood up, watched my father walk past, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The hallway outside the ballroom was carpeted and quiet, the noise of the reception muffled behind closed double doors. We stood near the elevator bank, my dad, my mom, me. Waiting in that particular silence of people who've just left somewhere and haven't decided what comes next. My mother spoke first, said my name, just my name. I know, I said. The elevator button was already lit. I watched the number above the doors count down. Excuse me. The voice came from behind us. Quick footsteps on the carpet. We turned. The man from the ballroom, the one who'd been watching my father. He was a little out of breath, like he'd come in a hurry. Desmond Roy? My father turned, looked at the man for half a second, the way he looked at everything, taking it in without reacting. Gordon. They knew each other. Gordon Pell stopped a few feet away, glanced at me, then back at my father. I'm sorry to bring this up out there. Didn't want to say anything in the room, but I've been on the advisory board for your funds for 4 years now. Didn't put it together that you... He paused. Didn't know your son was getting married. Didn't connect it until tonight. My father said, "This is my son." Gordon turned to me, put his hand out. Gordon Pell. I run Lakeside Capital Partners. Your father is our largest silent partner. We're talking about north of 400 million in assets under his management. I shook his hand, not sure what my face was doing. What? I said. My father was watching me. There were things you never needed to know, he said, until now. We moved down the hall, away from the elevators, to a small seating area near a window. My mother sat. My father stood. Gordon excused himself a moment later, said he had my father's number, said he'd be in touch. Then it was just the three of us. My father told me everything. He'd started the freight and logistics company back in 1991, 2 years before I was born. Built it out of a leased warehouse and a single truck. Ran it quietly for almost 30 years. No press, no profile, no industry plaques on the wall. He never wanted any of that. In 2018, he sold it to a private equity group for an amount he said out loud exactly once. Because you're my son and you've got a right to know. $620 million. Nothing changed after that. Not the house, not the truck, not the newspaper. I wanted you to have a real life, he said. Not a life of handouts. Wanted to know you'd make decisions based on who you are, not what I've got. I sat with that for a moment. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because the answer was always going to be the same. You didn't need it to be who you are. He reached into his jacket's inner pocket. There was the envelope I'd seen him holding that morning. He set it on the cushion beside me. That's a transfer of assets, put together last month. Part of it's in your name. Was meant to be a wedding gift. I didn't open it, just looked at it. He said, "You walked out of that room for me. That's worth more than anything in that envelope." Behind us, through the ballroom doors, I could hear the low murmur of 500 voices starting to understand what they'd just watched. Gordon Pell went back into the ballroom. He wasn't trying to start anything. He had a client at one of the tables, and he wasn't the type to make a scene. But he also wasn't the type to keep something like that to himself when the right person asked. The right person asked within 5 minutes. Businessmen in the same room tend to know each other, or know of each other. And the name, Desmond Roy, if you knew where to look, was tied to a 2018 transaction that had made it into the trade press. 15 minutes after Gordon walked back through those doors, 2 people had already searched the name on their phones. Within 20 minutes, the information was moving table to table the quiet, deliberate way. Important information moves between people who understand what it means. Roland's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from someone who'd been at the same table as Gordon. 6 words. "Did you know who his father is?" Roland stared at the screen, searched the name. The first result was a trade newsletter article. In 2018, North Shore Freight and Logistics was sold for $620 million in a landmark acquisition by a private equity firm out of Toronto. He turned to Marlene, showed her the screen without saying anything. She took the phone, read it, looked up, set it down on the table. Around her, the room kept making noise. People at other tables trying to piece it together, leaning in to listen. That particular electric hum of a crowd realizing the story they'd been watching wasn't the one they thought it was. Marlene stood completely still, hands on the table, both of them shaking slightly. Cole saw it from 2 seats away. Looked at the screen, said quietly, "Mom." She didn't answer him. Vanessa found me in the hallway about 30 minutes later. My parents had gone up to their room. I was still sitting in the seating area by the window, jacket off, staring at nothing. She'd been crying. Her mascara was holding up. Everything about her wedding day face was still intact, but her eyes were red, and she kept fussing with the sleeve of her dress. She sat across from me. "I didn't know she was going to say that," she said. "I believe you," I said. She looked up. "I didn't set it up. I didn't. It wasn't planned." "Vanessa," I said evenly. "You smiled. I was nervous. It was a reflex. I know what kind of smile that was. I'd been thinking about it for the 40 minutes since it happened, and I knew exactly what kind of smile it was. It wasn't cruel, wasn't deliberate. It was just the smile of someone relieved that something they'd been bracing for had finally happened. Even though the way it landed was ugly. That was the part I couldn't get past. I asked you months ago. Told you exactly what I needed. You looked me in the eye and promised you'd handle it. And when it mattered, you looked at the table and smiled." She was quiet a long time. Then she said, "My mother had an arrangement with the Ashworths. It's not that I was going to go through with it, but she kept, I know about that too." She went still. "Heard them talking," I said, "a week ago, in the kitchen." The hallway was quiet around us. Far off, through the walls, the muffled sound of a wedding winding down in a way nobody had planned for. "I don't think you're a bad person," I told her. "I think you're someone who'll always choose her family when it counts. And I can't build a life with someone who looks at my father the same way her mother does." She didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. "Take care of yourself, Vanessa." I picked up my jacket and headed for the elevator. My father's phone rang at 9:40 that night. He looked at the screen, then set it face up on the small hotel desk so I could see who was calling. "Marlene Hargrove." He let it ring twice. Then he picked up, "Mr. Roy." Her voice was different, slower. The warmth that usually wrapped around everything she said was gone, and what was underneath was just a woman who'd done the math and arrived at a number she didn't like. "I think there may have been a misunderstanding today." "There's no misunderstanding, Marlene," my father said. Calm, not cold, just finished. "You said what you meant to say. If I had known who that's exactly the problem." He ended the call, set the phone on the desk, looked at it a moment, then walked to the window and stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the lights of the city below. I sat on the edge of one of the beds, still in my dress shirt, watched him. He wasn't enjoying it. Nothing in his posture suggested satisfaction. He just stood there like a man who'd already said what he needed to say and had no interest in saying anything more. After a while, he turned around. "You good?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. He nodded. Found the TV remote, turned it on, flipped channels until he landed on a fishing program. Sat down in the chair by the window, We didn't talk much after that, just sat together in the room, TV low, the city outside doing its own thing. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, things happened to the Hargrove family that I only connected later. Roland had a commercial development deal pending with Lakeside Capital Partners, a mixed-use project on the east side of Oakville, financing in the neighborhood of $3 million. He'd been about 4 months from closing it. After the wedding, the emails stopped getting answered. Not rejected, not denied, just no response. His contact at the firm had been promoted. The new contact was very polite and very unreachable. The deal went into review with no defined timeline. Marlene sat on the advisory board for a local arts charity, the kind where having your name in the program means something. She was asked, without much explanation, to step down from the board that fall. The charity's largest anonymous donor had quietly raised concerns about the direction of the advisory structure. Nobody told Marlene who the donor was. Cole lost a client, a referral he'd had for 2 years, a family who'd bought and sold property through him reliably, who suddenly switched to another agent. He never found out why. None of them ever knew for certain whether any of it was connected to my father. But that's the thing about Desmond Roy. He didn't move loud. Things just flowed downstream the way rivers do because of what's upstream, not because of anything visible on the surface. What I know is this: my father didn't plan any of it. He didn't set out to ruin anyone. He was just a man who existed in certain spaces, and those spaces carried weight. Sometimes that's enough. 3 weeks after the wedding that didn't happen, I called the company in Calgary. The position was still open. The hiring manager said he'd been hoping I'd call back. I told him I was interested. He said they could have an offer to me by the end of the week. I thanked him and hung up. I drove up to the Sault that weekend and told my parents over dinner. My mother made a pot roast, the kind she only made when she felt like she needed something to settle her. My father listened to the whole thing and then said, "Should have taken it 2 years ago." I laughed. First time I'd laughed in 3 weeks. Felt something easing back toward normal, a little at a time. After dinner, I sat at the kitchen table while my mother washed dishes and my father read the paper. The same table I grew up at, the same kitchen. The curtain over the sink still had the same pattern from when I was 12. I watched my father's hands on the newspaper. Big hands, the kind that look like they've done real labor. Even though most of the work he'd done in his life had been in boardrooms and on conference calls, he'd built something real and never felt the need to tell anyone about it. Not me, not the neighbors, not the people at the bridal shower who saw his rented suit and decided they knew what he was. I sat with that for a long while. Before I get to what came after, I want to ask you something real. Have you ever had to choose between the person you were building a life with and the person who raised you? Because I was at that exact crossroads, and I didn't always know which way I'd lean. Tell me in the comments. And if you've stuck with me through this whole story, thank you. I mean that. I moved to Calgary in November, took one suitcase and the envelope my father had given me, still unopened. Calgary in late fall is dry and clear in a way that's easy to disappear into. I liked that. I needed a stretch of time where nobody knew what had happened. Found an apartment in the Beltline, small, good morning light, an easy walk to the office. Bought a coffee maker, set it on the counter, went back to work. The new job was harder than the old one, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. My father flew out in February. Told me he was coming, didn't ask. Just said he'd be there on the 14th, asked if the airport was easy to get to from where I lived. I said it was. He said good. He showed up in the same clothes he always wore. Flannel jacket, good boots. Looked around my apartment, gave a small nod, said, "Good light." That afternoon we walked along the river path, south, toward the bridges. Cold, clear sky, the river that flat winter color. We walked mostly in silence, the comfortable kind, the kind you earn. At some point I asked him about what I'd been carrying since September. "Why'd you never tell me any of this?" He walked a few more steps before answering. Didn't seem to be searching for the words, just giving the answer the space it needed. "Wanted to see who you'd become without it." "And?" I asked. He looked at me. "I'm proud of you," he said. 3 words, said plainly. No ceremony, the way he did everything. I didn't say anything back. Didn't need to. We kept walking. The river moved along beside us. The city kept going on overhead. There's something I've thought about a lot in the months since. Not the dramatic parts, not the ballroom, not Marlene's face, not the quiet phone call to Calgary. Something smaller, the curtain over the kitchen window back in the Sault. My parents never replaced it. The same curtain I used to stare at as a kid eating breakfast. faded a little at the top where the sun hit it. My father could have bought 10,000 kitchen curtains, could have replaced the truck, the house, the furniture, had the means to do it twice over, and never once thought about it. He wasn't faking modesty. He wasn't hiding from anything. At some point, he just decided the life he wanted to live didn't require any of that, and he lived it completely without ever looking back to see if anyone approved. I think about what I got wrong in those 2 years with Vanessa. Not loving her, that part was real, and I'm not ashamed of it. The mistake was staying past the point where the information was clear. I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt because I wanted the story to come out a certain way. That's on me, and I own it. What I didn't get wrong was that table in that ballroom. I wasn't wrong the moment I stood up and said what I said. I've been told my whole life, without really hearing it, that there are things you don't trade away. Not for comfort, not for convenience, not to keep the peace at a table, full of people who've already decided what you're worth. The man who taught me that was sitting in the 8th row, behind a marble column, in a rented suit and shoes he'd polished himself. He was the most valuable person in that room. He always had been. People sometimes ask if I regret how it went down. The moment, the room, the 500 people. No. Not because of what I found out afterward about my father. Not because of the envelope, or Gordon Pell, or whatever quietly happened to Roland's deal in the months that followed. Those things are part of the story, but they're not the reason. The reason is simpler. My father was 11 feet away from me when someone called him trailer trash into a live microphone. And the only question that mattered in that moment was, what kind of man am I? I gave the answer I could live with. Everything else came after. I opened the envelope in my Calgary apartment sometime in March. I won't tell you the number, but I sat with it for a while, then folded it and set it on the desk. Went and made myself a coffee. Stood at the window, looking out at the street. My father called that night. Asked if I'd opened it yet. I said I had. He asked what I thought. I told him it was a lot to take in. He said it was mine to do with whatever I wanted. Then he told me about a fishing program he'd watched the night before. That's Desmond Roy. That's him. I don't know what happened to Vanessa after. Heard secondhand the Ashworth deal never went anywhere. I wish her well. I mean that. As for me, I've got a good job, a small apartment with good light, and a father I call every few days who still reads a paper newspaper. That's the whole story. Have you ever had to choose dignity over comfort? Or watch someone you love get dismissed by people who had no idea who they were actually dealing with? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this one stuck with you, share it. Somebody out there needs to hear it today.